Good afternoon.
My God.
Unintentionally.
I'll wait and see. Is Casey coming?
So there's moving.
I'm not here.
Teresa has to be virtual, and she didn't tell us she was out of town. I think she told us that she wasn't gonna be here earlier, a long time ago. Yeah, a long time ago.
Yeah.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. We're gonna go ahead and call the meeting of the advisory council to order. First, we'll start with a roll call to confirm we have a quorum. Wayne Creedle. Benny Gates. Philip Hart.
Here.
Deanna James. Dave Johannes.
Yep.
Preston Lloyd.
Here.
Eric Mai. Charles Menges. Jennifer Mullen. Here. Kendra Norrell. Casey Overton. Michelle Parrish. Maritza Peachin. Damian Pitt.
Here.
Councilwoman Robertson. Brian White.
Okay.
Here.
Charlie Wilson.
Here.
Okay, we have a couple of requests to participate virtually. So we'll take, because we'll need a motion and a second for each of those. So can we take them all at once or individually?
We can.
Okay. Eric Mai, Charles Menges, and Kendra Norrell have asked to participate virtually,
Elizabeth, also Maritza.
and Maritza Peachin.
So the,
Well, I
Second.
think, as a point of order, I think each has to offer the basis for the request
Yes.
and where they're located.
So maybe we should take them separately. Eric, we'll start with you. Eric, you've requested to participate virtually. If you could just give a reason for your virtual participation and your current location, please. Bear with us, Eric. We see that you're, we're trying to unmute you. There you go, Eric.
Eric, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Okay. Eric, while we're waiting to get you connected, Kendra, are you able to unmute yourself? Okay, bear with us, folks. We'll get this fixed.
Renee, you can unmute yourself.
Unmute myself. Can you hear me?
I can hear you guys. Can you hear me?
Yes, thanks, Renee. Okay,
Okay.
Maritza, you requested to participate virtually. If you could just offer a reason for your request and let us know where you're calling in from.
I have to be out of town for work. I am in Washington, D.C.
Thank you. If we could get a motion and a second for Maritza.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Hi.
Great. Thanks, Maritza. Eric, are you able to unmute at this time? Okay, Kendra?
Eric,
We have Mr. Menges, who also made a request to participate. Mr. Charles Menges, are you online? All right.
Eric did advise that he's taking the call from his home as his wife is about to deliver a baby.
And Kendra has a business conflict, and she is in town and will be taking the meeting from her office.
Well, it sounds like we can make the vote, but from a technological standpoint, to be able to participate, just listen in as anyone else.
Can we get a motion and a second for Eric and Kendra to participate virtually?
Move.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, Kendra, Eric, we've gone ahead and motioned to allow you to participate virtually. I understand there's some technological issues. So hopefully we can get those solved so that you can participate. Mr. Hall or Brock Hall, I see you have your hand raised, but we're not at the point where we're taking public comment at the moment. So you can come back during the public comment period. Yes.
Can we make a request when people speak that they show their faces if they can?
Yes. So the request from Mr. Johannes is for those virtual, if you can, if you're speaking, if you could come on camera if possible. And I also want to remind the advisory committee too, that when we are speaking, for those watching and at home virtually, if you could announce your name and please remember to speak loudly so folks can hear us. So I want to thank you all for joining us today. This is a reminder, the advisory committee is a committee of the Richmond City Planning Commission, and we're charged with advising the Planning Commission, the Department of Planning and Development Review, and the consultant team in the ordinance revision process. The public will have an opportunity to speak during the public comment period at the beginning of the meeting. And as I already stated, as a reminder for the advisory committee, can speak up so online listeners can hear and state your name at the beginning of your comments. So you should have all received by email the May meeting notes. We need to approve those. Does anyone have any comments, questions? If not, we're going to go for approval.
So moved.
Second.
The motion is seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Great. So at this time, we'll open the public comment period. This is an opportunity for the public to comment on any items that are not on today's agenda. So we'll start with folks that are in the room. Please, if you could come forward and provide us with your name, this is the opportunity for you to comment.
Hello, my name is Richard Hankins. I'm the Executive Director of the Partnership for Smarter Growth. We advocate for the Richmond region that plans sustainably grow exclusively in connects communities. We are growing here in the city. However, for the city to grow while not pricing people out, we can no longer have a zoning code that incentivizes a certain style of development with low density and separate uses. The committee, staff, and consultants have done a good job steering our future code in a way that allows Richmond to grow fairly, preserving while expanding market rate affordable housing, and that the draft zoning map last month has done a great job of unlocking underutilized strip malls and undeveloped parts of the city for future potential nodes of development. However, if the city is serious about meaningfully increasing housing supply in an equitable way, while not displacing Richmonders, it must deeply consider how it's approaching residential detached districts. Residential detached zoned land accounts for 60% of the land in Richmond, only making up a fraction of the city's population. While Code Refresh has proposed allowing duplexes in these areas and eliminating lot size minimums in all residential areas, allowing duplexes or excessive lot width, particularly in RDA, severely limits potential housing availability. Therefore, we ask for reduced lot width across our RD districts, particularly in RDA. Furthermore, existing suburban single-family zoning means that many Richmonders need to get in the car to go to work, grocery store, receive medical care, or even visit friends. It's not to say that Richmond does not have dense mixed-use walkable neighborhoods. We do. Unfortunately, these neighborhoods are disincentivized in today's zoning code. We need to re-legalize many of these iconic neighborhoods through the pattern book. Finally, we also ask for a zoning code that supports the 15-minute city concept so that all residents have small-scale commercial like coffee shops and pharmacies and walking. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, thank you guys for your time. My name is Joseph Carlisle. I biked over here today. I live in North Churchill. I've lived there for the past 2 years. I've been a resident in Richmond for 12. I started at VTU. I lived in the Fan. I lived downtown. Now I'm planning on staying in Churchill for the rest of my years. I wanted to express my concern that the current draft zoning map does not go far enough to prepare Richmond for the future. We've heard multiple times that the last rewrite was in the 70s. If this new code is expected to carry us into the next few decades, then we need to get it right. Richmond is growing. The question is whether we're going to go and plan for that growth in a way that's equitable, sustainable, and effective, or whether we'll continue to stall and protect the status quo. We're not building enough housing to meet the demand, and that's simple, and it's a simple fact. The current draft map does not go far enough to address this challenge, and the debate over allowing duplexes and ADUs by right should be settled. We need to allow for more than just one dwelling per unit, per parcel across our city. Gentle density, it's not a threat, it's a solution. It's deeply frustrating that exemptions from growth are being considered for the most educated, affluent, and opportunity-rich neighborhoods of our city. No neighborhood should be exempt from change, and no single neighborhood should have to be subject to all of the city's change. Every neighborhood should have to do their part. This process should be about making Richmond work for more people, not preserving privilege. If the zoning map is going to shape our city for the next few decades, we should zone for real growth. MX3 should be removed and replaced back with MX4. MX6 or higher is appropriate in all our commercial and transit-rich neighborhoods. We need a bolden and upzone in neighborhoods like downtown, the Fan, the Museum District, Carytown, Scott's Addition, Manchester, Northside, and Churchill. These neighborhoods are already among the most dense and best served by transit and are well suited for alternative modes of transportation outside of the car. Let's build on those strengths. We also need to upzone to at least MX6 along the current Pulse corridor and the future north-south line, as well as within a half a mile of every Pulse stop or proposed stop. If we don't act now, we'll be right back to where we are here in 20 years, facing even worse affordability and sustainability problems. And we can't afford to keep sprawling because Richmond is a city and we should plan like one. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Ian Bryant, and I'm a resident of the 7th District. The current draft zoning map, I have a lot of concerns about it, and I don't think it goes far enough in addressing cities housing needs. The fact of the matter is we have the issue with housing today because we don't build enough homes to meet demand, and the primary reason for that is our current zoning from the 1970s. It zones primarily for single-family detached residential homes. This pattern of growth, it locks in sprawl, it locks in inequitable development, and it keeps people from being able to afford their rent, buy homes in neighborhoods they want to live in, build wealth, and live in a sustainable way. The city should allow duplexes by right across the city. On many neighborhoods are still zoned for residential attached. It is just continuing the same unsustainable patterns that we see today and have led to this crisis. I know in many of your previous public comments, there's been a lot of support for this idea, and I would love to see it implemented. Furthermore, I live in Shockoe Bottom, one of the city's prime examples of mixed-use development. It's close to transit. It's got abundant multimodal options for getting around without a car. It's one of the city's jewels, and we should lean into that, take advantage of that by allowing it to upzone further. A lot of it's in this map is zoned to be MX3. It should be MX6 or higher, to allow for the type of development that will make Richmond more equitable and sustainable and affordable community for all. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. My name is Nora Thompson, and I live in the Henry Place neighborhood, which has been slated to become the new zoning category RDC, which is residential detached high. And I'm here to encourage you to reconsider the rezoning of our neighborhood. I understand the need for more housing, and I totally support it. However, it must also be affordable housing. I know close to our neighborhood on the corner of Grove and Hamilton are a set of condos that are $600,000 each, and they've not been able to sell them. There's only half of them are sold, and it's been for sale for quite a while. The high cost is prohibitive. And how can a young family making low income or minimum wage manage purchasing a home of that cost? How can they come up with a down payment of $120,000? My next door neighbors were renting and they had newborn twins and they wanted to stay in their home and purchase it from their landlord. They both worked full time, but they weren't able to come up with the down payment. They didn't have generational wealth or family money. These are the families that we're losing by building very expensive new housing options. When I read the Richmond 300 guide, it said the city is in a position to become a welcoming, inclusive, diverse, innovative, and equitable city of thriving neighborhoods, ensuring a high quality of life for all. Our neighborhood is already welcoming, already inclusive, already diverse, and offers a high quality of life. I'm wondering why we need to rezone our neighborhood. Other neighborhoods are nearby. Across the street from us is Windsor Farms. They have larger lots and several empty lots that could support additional homes much better than our small neighborhood. Windsor Farms is less inclusive and diverse than our neighborhood. I'm wondering why they're not being rezoned to the same density as we are. Does it have to do with the inequity of income and wealth between our two neighborhoods, and they are being prioritized more highly than ours? I also wanted to personally just tell you about our neighborhood and what this zoning change might mean for us. I have a beautiful tulip magnolia tree in the front yard. It's so beautiful that our neighborhood has an annual party for it when it blooms. And people come over and eat dinner and talk, and we gather together to celebrate, and we build community. And I wonder what will happen if we have the new zoning, which could allow two 35 to 50-foot buildings on either side of me, 3 feet from my lot line. Would my tree have shade and no sun, and would my tree die? This rezoning could take away a community building asset for our neighbor. And in Henry Place, we have smaller homes for more. My house is a 1-story, 988 square foot house. And it would be dwarfed by two 35 to 50 foot places on either side. I have a garden, and my grandchildren pick tomatoes and pumpkins and raspberries, and they run their hands through the lavender bushes and smell them. And I think, will there be enough sun to have a garden? This takes away from my family's shared love of gardening and my wish to teach my grandchildren about the earth and growing your own food. So I just ask you to please reconsider. Thank you.
Good afternoon.
Hi, good afternoon, ZAC members. Thank you for offering the community the time and space to provide input on the city's code refresh. And thank you for offering your time and expertise at this crucial juncture in the city's future. My name is Kevin Ciamperini. I've been a resident of the Fulton neighborhood for the past 4 years, and I've lived in Richmond for the past 8. Before living in Fulton, I lived in Shockoe Bottom, the Museum District, and my husband and I even attempted to buy a home in Churchill, but we lost multiple bidding wars over single-family homes. My comments today about the draft zoning code are two-pronged. First, I would like to mention some improvements specific to the Fulton neighborhood. And second, I would like to address some inconsistencies that concern me across the city as a whole. In the heart of Fulton, at the intersection of Government Road and Williamsburg Avenue, most of the parcel designations there are MX3 and RX4. I would like to see this node, which is designated as a medium opportunity area in Richmond's 300 master plan, upzoned further, ideally to MX8. I'm not the only person concerned about this lack of proposed density either. The executive director of Innovate Fulton, Chuck Dupree, who can't be here today, wanted me to relay that he also supports further density in this area. I plan to stay in Fulton in the long haul and would jump at the opportunity for more mid-income housing opportunities in the core of my neighborhood. Please upzone this node further. Additionally, the proposed zoning around the Rockets Landing full stop seems spotty. Several of the parcels are designated as MX13, one is MX8, and the rest are MX6. Confusingly, one of the currently proposed MX13 parcels has a newly built 6-story apartment building, so this node next to the bus transit is even less dense than it appears in the draft zoning map. Please upzone around this full stop ubiquitously to MX13 and allow people to live near transit. And then as for the concerns that are citywide, I previously emailed Director Vaughn the laundry list of concerns, and I would like to take this opportunity to raise the most important one, duplexes. I was extremely disappointed by the ZAP comments stating, quote, all RDA, RDB, and RDC districts should not permit duplexes or 2 residential units on any lot. This is just one of several ZAP comments imparting this sentiment. I currently live in an area that's proposed to be RDB, and I wholeheartedly disagree with this statement. I would welcome new neighbors of all income levels and backgrounds to live alongside me. When I found out the city's previously passed affordable housing plan not only calls for duplexes, but also triplexes in all residentially owned areas, and that this plan was being ignored by these specific ZAP comments, I was incensed. It is completely unacceptable that this is up for debate. It's high time that the more sparsely populated areas in the city, like where I live, start accepting new neighbors for the betterment of the entire city. Please fully support 2 and 3 residential units on every residentially zoned area, and also consider that the desires of the 1st and 4th districts are not representative of a majority of Richmond residents. Thank you for your consideration.
So my name is Mary Meadows. I reside at 3903 Hanover Avenue. And I have been in the Richmond area since I graduated from MCB in 1979. So I love the city. I've lived in the 1st district the whole time I've been here. But I am against the increase in the density in my little neighborhood, Colonial Place. There is an SUP that goes to the Planning Commission on Tuesday to try and put 6 townhomes in the backyards, 3801 and 3803 Hanover. And I feel like zoning should protect the neighborhood. Zoning should respect the neighborhood. This is a neighborhood of single-family homes with yards, big trees, mature plantings, and we don't all need to be Scott's Addition.
Thank you for the executive members. I live in Northern Barton Heights. I purchased my home in 2000. My home was used as the city's first-time home buyers program here in the Richmond area, put on by Neighborhoods in Bloom and Neighborhood Housing Services of Richmond. I purchased in 2000, and I purchased an old rectory building. And I have myself rebuilt this entire thing. Me and my partner have actually done most of the work that's been done to this home. We completed the home 4 years ago. We paid off the home. We've been in it now for 25 years. And when we bought this home, we were under the understanding that we weren't just buying the home, we were buying into the neighborhood too. And we were buying a home that had rules set around it to protect its integrity and to protect its character. And the new zoning that's coming into Northern Barton Heights is basically destroying that. I'm going to now have the possibility of having having multiplexes in front and behind me. But my little row of street houses stays zone houses. When you go through our neighborhood in the evening, there is not a place to park. If you're lucky, you have a driveway or you have a place in the back of your property. But on the street, there is no parking. And I just can't understand how bringing more units of living into that neighborhood is going to work with the parking issue itself. But I'm also concerned about the fact that it'll displace a lot of the people that have lived in our neighborhood for decades. Some of these people can't afford the rents that will be coming in with these new builds. And these new builds are going to be replacing a lot of homes. And the way I see this program working out is that you're opening the door for developers and you're shutting the door on the community, shutting the door on the people that actually live there. We should have a real voice in what happens in our neighborhood. And if you've got a contract with the city, which I do, from 1976, the last big plan, Y'all put this in place. I bought my home. I've played by the rules. I've paid my home off. I've done my part in the neighborhood. I do the beautification programs, and we've removed 6 tons of trash out of our neighborhood in 4 hours. We work really hard to maintain our neighborhood and to make it a beautiful place with a wonderful character. And I just feel like this plan moving forward, the way it is now on the map, I know it's not finalized, but it's taking the land away from the residents and it's putting it in the hands of developers. And I'm just against it. I know we need more density. I don't have an issue with density like on Brooklyn Parkway, Brooklyn Park Boulevard node. That's a good area to do high rises through there. But again, they have their own merchants association. And these people have bought these businesses. And some of them have bought the properties. Some of them have just rented the businesses for a cheap rate because of where we're located. But what's going to happen to all of our neighbors' businesses whenever they come in and they build new buildings that are multiplexes and charge them outrageous amounts of rent to have their spot back? I just feel like this is going the wrong direction in Martin Heights. William Johnson.
Are there any other members in the public present today?
Because I think we're commenting on the agenda, but
If you could
Is that
state your
okay?
name too. We're going to
it's-
comment on items that are not on the agenda, but we're,
okay, so, my name is Meg Lawrence, and I live in Dinner Park. I would just like to say that, the MX3 zoning as it appears, on the map is certainly more appropriate than the MX4. I'm not saying that MX3 is necessarily appropriate. I just want to say it is more appropriate than MX4. And I appreciate that this is the beginning of a process. And I would just like to also mention to the committee that the part of Chamberlain Avenue, which in the master plan is now corridor mixed use, the highest residential designation. And residential is even a secondary use as defined in corridor mixed use. There are a whole lot of other uses that are primary. Residential is under secondary. So I would just like to mention that the part of Chamberlain Avenue that is in Dinner Park, with the exception of one former medical office building and a couple of lots up by Azalea Avenue, the area from Azalea Avenue to Brooklyn Park Boulevard is currently zoned entirely residential. I do believe that this is the only area of the city that has gone from a residential designation in the master plan to a corridor mixed use. So, I look forward to further discussion.
thank you.
Good afternoon, ZAC committee members. My name is Joe Gelbach. I'm here representing RBA YIMBY. YIMBY stands for Yes in My Backyard. We're a local chapter. A couple of my other co-leads spoke previously, and I associate my comments with them. But I felt inclined to speak today as a Henrico resident. I don't live in the city, so don't all do it once. But I would like to live in the city at some point. And I think the conversations that are happening here in this room and that will subsequently happen at City Council have an impact on not only the people who live in the city, but the people who would like to live in the city, whether they live elsewhere in the region or if they live anywhere else in the United States or elsewhere and they want to move here. So I just kind of wanted to put a voice to that, and I don't know, maybe one day I'll be a city resident too. Thank you guys.
Anybody else that's present, so if you could come forward and provide your name.
Hello, my name is Don O'Keefe. I'm an architect, planner, run a nonprofit architectural history commentary website called Architecture Richmond in the city for 13 years. And I do not live in West End, but I do live in the city in the fan, and I would like to speak in favor of being bold with this rezoning process, because I think we're really dealing now with the fruits of a very entrenched system of zoning, which was always a mistake in my view, and which has in many ways contributed to negative outcomes in health, economics, social justice, and so many other things for our city. I think that when we make it hard to build in the city, we make it easy to build in the county, and so we have a lot of greenfield development, a lot of forests, woodland being cut down, farmlands being turned into suburban shopping centers, and so on. And a big part of changing that, in my view, is going to be reconcentrating development in areas that are already developed. And I think it's going to be a positive change. It will definitely be a significant change. It will definitely be a change that alters our view of what Richmond is. But in my view, it's a change that could make the city more beautiful, more equitable, and more walkable, more transit oriented. And some of these things are going to involve some growing pains, parking and so on. But in my view, you know, we have an opportunity with this rezoning plan to make a once in a generation change to the system. And I think we have decades of evidence to show that the zoning policies put in place after the Second World War have contributed to negative outcomes in so many of these arenas. So it's time to kind of grin and bear it a little bit, be bold. And I think that a lot of the recommendations made in the Richmond 300 plan, which haven't been enacted so far, really should be, and without too much backlash. So I would just like to give my strong support to being as ambitious as possible, and also thinking about the generations of people who are being impacted now by the housing crisis and will be impacted in the future by climate change and habitat destruction if we don't act to make development easier in areas where city services and utilities already are. And of course, just wanted to say that, you know, we should also be looking to other cities and other countries as to a model of what to do, because I think probably everyone in this room can agree that planning in the city of Richmond has not been great for the past 50 years, despite efforts by a lot of well-intentioned people. But, you know, when the UN Conference on Climate Change has listed land use reform as one of the important things we can do to combat the environmental crisis every year since that report was issued, I think it's kind of time to step up. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Everybody else is in the room. I'm going to go ahead and move to the online participants. Is there anybody online that would like to offer public comment on items not on the agenda? Okay. Kotsi Copeland, I think I saw your hand raised first. Hi, good afternoon. You're muted. Can you unmute yourself?
You should be able to unmute yourself.
You should be able to unmute yourself now. Okay, bear with us, Ms. Copeland, while we're working on getting you access. We'll move over to Brock Hall. Brock, are you able to unmute yourself?
Okay, I am now. Awesome.
Okay, Ms. Copeland, we'll come back to you. Just a moment. Go ahead, Brock.
Can I be heard? I'm going to turn my... Do I look okay? My hair is kind of ridiculous. Hopefully it's all right. Yeah, I'm just going to... my name's Brock Hall. I currently live in the 6th district in Manchester. And just thought I would speak kind of generally to the code refresh. My goal... Do I still have my hand? No, that's fine. My goal is to really emphasize that if you want things to be different you have to do things differently. I originally was pretty excited about the code refresh, but my worry was that it would kind of just settle into the same patterns that, American cities have gone by for the last 70 years, 50 years, 100 years. And looking at the draft zoning map and some of the draft zoning rules, it is basically the same thing that as American cities have been doing for the last 50 years, 70 years. I have two examples. I don't want to take up tons of time, so I don't know if I'll get to both of them. But I think the sort of general buy rate increase towards, allowing duplexes everywhere, allowing low rises is is basically the same thing that American cities have been doing for a long time, like trying to manage growth with these sort of slight increases in heights allowances. But from my perspective, it's totally irrelevant. So I'm interested in overall housing costs, overall rent, accessibility, traffic, walkability, and things like that. And duplexes just are not enough housing to really make any difference at all. It's basically a rounding error. And I think from a resident's perspective, and there are economic reasons that it actually doesn't lead to very much actual development. So, and I think from the resident's perspective, and some people have commented on this basic idea, even though it's very little housing, that doesn't really change anything as far as, cost of living. From the perspective of residents, there are lots of these generally stupid squares everywhere. So these duplexes, especially new ones, are just squares, and then low rises are just squares. So from residents' perspective, there are all these stupid squares everywhere. And I can't remember who it was, but two people mentioned their house being surrounded by these tall-ish buildings that they didn't like. And so, like, imagine you have like a low rise, right, surrounding your house. It would be better, so it puts shade in everything. But what puts even less shade is no building. So if instead of having two low rises, you had one mid rise, then you have one totally undeveloped lot that could be something else. And instead of having this one mid-rise, you could have no mid-rises, and somewhere else you could have a 12-story building that's more out of the way and less intrusive for the neighborhood itself. And then since it's single use, that makes parking really hard, right? Because shared parking is what you want. And that makes parking easier because when a business is closed, residents can park there. And when residents are away, customers can park there. And it's really frustrating. I did parking advocacy for a while that the city's just kind of been blowing that off for almost 10 years. And it's very frustrating considering all the complaints about parking. So, you could be, instead of having all these little buildings everywhere that are really annoying and look bad, you could have a fewer larger developments that are mixed use that now you have things to walk to. It lowers traffic congestion, easier to find parking, all these different other advantages that are both more efficient from an infrastructure and revenue perspective, right? So the city makes more money, which they can spend on like fixing up the water treatment plant, but also, like many people have been talking about, much less disruptive for the actual like sense of the neighborhood. And then the other thing that I also find very frustrating is this idea of putting, so if you look at the mixed use map, it's generally clustered around roads with lots of cars, and especially cars that want to go fast. So the whole point of mixed use is that it's easier to walk to where you want to go because it's closer, and so you end up with more pedestrians, right? But if you have all these pedestrians mixing around with cars that want to go fast, that's how you get pedestrians run over, right? That's how you get traffic fatalities or people with limbs that don't work anymore. And that's a bad thing. And then similarly for the drivers, it sucks for drivers because now they have to avoid pedestrians. They don't like running over pedestrians. And then the city puts stop signs and stuff because they're cheaper, right, than like pedestrian beacons. So in general, you don't want to have these mixed use developments, especially ones that cross the street, right? So if you have mixed use on both sides, it's especially bad. You don't want to do that. So unless you want to get rid of cars, which I don't think, some places, I think that's a very realistic thing to do. But, I don't think there's interest in doing that on Broad Street or Hall Street or Midlothian or whatever else. So
Mr. Hall, if you could start to wrap up, please.
Oh, sure. I'm just about to. I'm sorry. I get excited about things. So basically, there are just a lot of places in the city that don't have a lot of cars. And so focus mixed use development there rather than trying to, use pedestrians' bodies as traffic calming or whatever. So, and this is something American cities have been doing for a long time. And just to wrap up, yeah, I mean, doing the same thing over and over isn't going to change anything. And a lot of this zoning code rewrite and parcel mapping and stuff is basically just doing the same thing over and over again. So thank you.
Thank you for your comments. We appreciate your excitement. We'll go back to our first speaker. I apologize if I said that correctly. Copeland Casati. Can you hear us?
I
Okay,
can hear
great.
you. I can hear you. It looks like I have to hold the control and space bar down to speak.
I can hear you now. I apologize for the technical difficulties. If you could just provide us with your name, and this is your opportunity to provide comments.
Sure, thank you. I'm Copeland Casati. I live on West Gray Street. I'm going to hop over just to my little paragraph that I wrote, and so I'll be muted for a moment.
We can't hear you now.
Ma'am, you're back on mute.
Maybe it's when she's on a different screen.
Ma'am, we can't hear you. There you go. There you go.
Well, now I can't read, but that's all right. I'll just talk off the cuff.
Just speak from the heart. We got you.
I live on West Gray Street, and so we really are closely watching development and welcome density and activity on South Broad Street. Gray Street is actually one of the most dense neighborhoods in the city. And, if you know anything about Grace, we are all kinds of mixes between renters and owners and affordability, and we love our diversity of living. What we do really want that nobody has mentioned today is sunlight. If you're familiar with Richmond row houses that have been prominently featured in campaigns of tourism for decades, you will know that they are long, narrow, and close together, and with windows thoughtfully placed to welcome any accessible daylight. We love density, but we do not want Broad to overshadow us. Study after study after study is coming out now with the importance of sunlight on health and energy efficiency costs. And so we welcome density, but we only want you to upzone to what is there right now, which is 1 to 2 stories. So we would welcome 2 to 4 stories, but save our sunlight so that everyone can bloom.
Thank you, ma'am. Is there anybody else online? Okay. Seeing none, we're going to close the public comment period. Thank you, everyone. I think this is the most public comment we've received to date, so I'm excited by the attention and enthusiasm for the zoning ordinance update. I'm going to turn it over to Mary Ann for a quick council recap and meeting introduction.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to be brief. Last meeting, we went over the use provisions and had questions that were facilitated by our consultant team. And so they're taking the answers in that discussion and using that to modify the use provisions. So they're working on that. Currently, today, we're going to take a deep dive into your comments that you've all have made. So the map, the initial first draft map was available online for the advisory council to provide comments until June 4th. And so they're taking those comments, come up with some questions for you all. It's also an opportunity for you all to add additional comments for people that didn't have the opportunity to provide any on that map. So that's what next. We're here till 6:30.
Remember this. Do any council members have any questions for Mary Ann?
Yeah, so I'm looking ahead at the agenda for the presentation, and it says, there's a section on the major themes and the comments, summary of comments, proposed actions. Are we going to be looking at a map that incorporates the proposed actions, or does any map have still the one that you commented on?
Maybe I can help respond to that. No, we haven't made any changes to the map since the last draft that we shared with you guys. So we can bring up the original map if we need to jog somebody's memory, but we haven't made changes yet. So we just want to kind of discuss some of the approaches we're thinking about taking in response to comments and go over some of the comments that were made. And then the idea would be to come up with a revised draft that would be shared at the upcoming open house.
Anybody else? Okay, Mary Ann, you also have the next item on the agenda, the working group update. And while this is very important, we are a bit behind of the very robust public comment we had. Hopefully everyone can read these summaries. If you just want to hit the highlights,
Sure.
let's get into the map.
So if you all take a look, you have copies of the exact notes that were taken from the working groups. We're actually having our second places working group meeting tomorrow afternoon. I'll bring back more summarized material and how we're taking those comments into making changes in the documents at the next meeting. The next meeting, Renee's going to go over a timeline, but I'm going to be taking the open house comments, so it'll be a good time to talk both about the working group and so you can dive deeper next.
Any members of the council have questions for Mary Ann on the working group? Comments?
Great, we have like over 100 people for this. Or that's more.
Just recommend that the advisory council take a moment to read these before our next meeting. Sounds like we will take a deeper dive. And I want to get us into the map now. Great. If there's no additional comments for Mary Ann, I'll turn it over to Renee Beaverstein to start our discussion on the draft zoning map.
Thank you. Give me a sec here. I'm going to share my screen. You should be able to see my screen now. Are you able to do that?
Yes.
Okay, great. So as I go through this, apologize, you're very tiny on my screen, so I'm going to need Elizabeth or somebody else to help moderate when we do discussion, so I can't see who might be raising their hands, for example. And also, please just speak up, please, or get close to the mic, just so that we can hear you as well, if you don't mind. So before I go through the comments, I just want to just briefly touch on the timeline for the remaining part of this project, just so everybody's on the same page and you see what's coming up. So we had to slightly shift the timeline because we needed a little bit more time for discussion in some of these past meetings that we've had. So this is sort of the lay of the land looking over the rest of the year and into the beginning of next year. And just want to share this with you just to kind of give you a sense of where we're going. So this is really the last ZAC meeting we're having today related to Module 1, which was the mapping and the districts. That's going to culminate in the upcoming panel and open house sessions later this month. So we really hope all of you guys can come out for that and add your comments to that as well. At that point, we'll be sharing, as I just said before, we'll be sharing a sort of a public-facing draft of the materials that you've seen so far, so including the districts and the mapping, and collecting more public feedback. In July, the July ZAC will be having discussion about what that feedback was. So we'll share it back with you and we can talk about it. And we're going to introduce sort of the idea of development standards and what those goals might be. So that's getting into Module 2. The August meeting, we'll have a chance to have a sort of a more detailed discussion, having introduced the intents of development standards, about what sort of development standards you like to see and where you'd like us to go. We're also going to introduce some draft development standards to share with you. And then we'll have another opportunity in September to kind of discuss those drafts in more detail and think about changes or adjustments we might want to make. Also in that September meeting, we'll introduce the goals of the administrative portion of the code, which is the processes associated with approvals and whatnot. So we'll be kind of introducing the purpose of that. We'll have a discussion with you about things you'd like to see in the administrative processes, changes you'd like to see in the October meeting. And then we'll also introduce some of our draft approaches to administrative processes then. We'll have an opportunity in November to discuss those draft approaches. And then we'll announce sort of the final process of putting out the public review draft at that point. There's going to be a November panel and open house. That'll be the last scheduled set of open houses. So that will focus on the content of modules 2 and 3. So again, module 2 being the development standards and module 3 being the administrative processes. So they'll be put out to the public to for everybody to see and comment on. I'm suggesting we may not need to have a December meeting because it's getting closer to the holidays, but there's still a question mark there. So we'll have to see if we need that to kind of keep discussion going. If it feels like we need to have more discussion, we could use that. In January, we're going to present the revisions that we're thinking about making to modules 1 through 3 based on your comments and the public's comments. And we'll, again, announce that upcoming public review process and provide some dates and whatnot at that point. In February, the actual public review draft would be released. So we would essentially have a complete draft of the code put online for public comment. We're thinking about having a webinar around that time as well that would allow members of the public to learn a bit more about the nature of the draft and ask questions about it. And so the final timeline for the review of that draft is still to be determined, but that's the point at which it would go out in complete form for the public. So any questions about that while we're here? It's roughly a similar kind of order of things as before. It's a little bit stretched out where it originally was.
There's no questions, Renee.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So let me move ahead to the comments in the draft mapping. So I'll just take you through this. This is what we received from Zach. This is comments from Zach members only, although I would just say I appreciate all the comments that we just heard from the public. And I think those are really insightful. We'll certainly take those into consideration as well as whatever comments we receive in the upcoming open house from the public. But this is just referring to comments from Zach members on the Miro board that we set up. So we got a total of 138 comments. Plus 72 replies. So there's an opportunity to kind of have a discussion about some of the comments. We heard from 9 of the 18 ZAC members. Thank you very much to all those who commented. For those who didn't comment, I would certainly invite you to jump in today if you've got other comments that you want to add as well too, so that we hear your voice. Just to kind of go over the topics, and I'm going to have hopefully an opportunity to kind of briefly discuss each one of these. I think because we're a little bit short on time now, we'll probably focus on some of the ones that had the most, the largest number of comments. And maybe we go through quickly some of the others. But just to kind of give you a bit of an overview of the comments that we heard, the largest number of comments were people looking for just increases in intensity in different parts of the map. And we can talk a little bit more about where and what that is. We had comments also about upzoning along transit corridors in particular, and we'll have a discussion again about how we approach some of those upzonings. There were concerns about MX3, which again we just heard from some members of the public as well, that we had sort of taken the former MX4 zone and changed it to MX3. Some thought we had sort of gone too far down with that. So we have some thoughts about how we're going to handle that. Upzonings along major streets, separate from enhanced transit corridors. The approach to infill zoning. So there were some thoughts that some areas seemed kind of spotty, and it was a little bit hard to understand, how we'd zone for sort of areas where there's growth mixed in with areas, properties that are unlikely to grow. Decreases in intensity. So some people wanted more intensity, some people wanted less. We hear both. But different places. Comments about transitions and buffers. So when you have a more intensive and a less intensive area coming up against each other, how do you transition those? Some people just had some trouble understanding what was being proposed, and we have a few thoughts about how we can maybe make some of it a little bit more clear. Certainly one of them will just be having a discussion today. So again, we hope that we can hear from you guys for those who had trouble understanding certain things and try and help clarify things for you. Some people talked about, they looked at the plan, they looked at the zoning, they didn't think that they were aligned in some places. Of course, the zoning is supposed to implement the plan, so they should generally be aligned. So we'll talk about that. Height limits, people had some thoughts about some changes to the height limits. Mixed use in residential areas, which we've talked about before in the use discussions. How far do we go with allowing mixed uses in some of those areas? The approach to institutional zones. The range of industrial uses that might be allowed in the industrial mixed use zones, the approach to auto-oriented uses, which we talked about before, especially on some of those outlying corridors, Preservation of views. I think we're not talking so much about specific views here, but more just about a sense of openness and sort of sky views or views to vistas. So some thoughts about that. Coordination with other municipalities as well, adjacent municipalities, especially where you're up against the borders of some of those. So there may be others as well. I've sort of sorted this through this chart, which you guys have seen. I'd like to sort of go through it and maybe put some of the questions out to you as we go through this in terms of the approaches that we're going to take. Again, I would invite people who have spoken, who have made comments already to maybe explain them if they need more explanation, but I would also invite those who haven't commented to jump in as well. At the end, I'd like to make sure we leave a little bit of time at the end for just kind of open comments if there's anything else that people feel wasn't addressed here. So I'm going to try and see if I can keep us moving as quickly as I can. So just to start at the top here, trouble understanding changes. Some people wanted to know more about precisely what was being changed. So they saw a proposal on the Miro board, but they didn't necessarily understand what it was like right now. So I think that it's a bit challenging just technically to do that. We're working on a kind of an updated electronic version of the map that may be able to turn layers on and off so we can sort of see what the underlying existing zoning is and compare that to today. When we get to the open house, I think we're going to try and make a board that does a bit of a selected comparison of some of those changes. So typically, focusing on residential districts, where there's typically one existing district that's being switched out for another one in the future, a new one, to kind of compare the actual details of those side by side. So it's easier for people to understand what's being changed. So we're thinking about that and working on that. Some people also just, there were some intense comments that happened on the Miro. And some people just felt like, it wasn't a really productive place to have discussions. So I'm hoping that we can have a bit of discussion today, that it can remain civil, but that we can have a productive discussion in terms of where people really feel differently about things, because we understand there are some very different opinions. So let's go diving into the actual content here. Concerns about MX3. So like I said, we had a zone called MX4 before, 4-story mixed use, up to 4 stories. Some people felt like that was going too far before, so we kind of put it down to MX3, and then we kind of heard the opposite from people saying that's too low. So the compromise I think we're thinking about right now, and again, I would like to put this out to you guys, that maybe we keep the MX3, but we use that sparingly in only kind of little commercial or mixed-use pockets that are surrounded by neighborhoods. Where it's maybe more appropriate to have 3 stories when you're up against 2- and 3-story houses, but that where you have larger, more intensive mixed-use areas along corridors, that we generally kind of upzone those to MX6 rather than using MX3 or MX4, which seems maybe a little too little. And then maybe around some major intersections and BRT stops, we might go up to MX8. So obviously we haven't actually put this on a map yet. This is just sort of a thought, but we'll like to kind of put this out to you guys briefly and sort of see if this seems like a good idea to you or how you feel about it.
Are we getting feedback right now, or are we running through the full list?
That's a great question. Renee, Charlie asked if you want our feedback with each item or if you want to wait until you run through these.
Each item.
We're going to go through each item. Okay. So I think Dave Johannes has a question first, and then Charlie, we'll go back to you.
Yeah, I don't have a question. I have a comment about it in terms of losing the MX4. To me, that MX4 is a really strong opportunity. And there's some places where you might want to drop something down from a 6 or an 8 and put a 4 in just because it's proximity. And the MX3, there's very few spots that I can imagine where the MX3 is so important. Going from a 35 or a 40-foot existing district up to a 45 or 50-foot for 1 story, or 55 even. It sounds really tall when you have those numbers, but when you're standing on the ground looking up, nobody's going to know the difference between 50 or 55 feet or 45 and 55 feet. So, I'm not supportive of losing an MX4. I think there's lots of places where we could put MX4, and I'd hate to see it drop down to 3.
Okay.
Charlie speaking. Yeah, I mean, I understand you're trying to thread the needle and in some ways please everybody, so I'm sympathetic.
depending on the mapping, is the common refrain that as written, you could have scenarios where like the corridor is denser than the node itself, perhaps. And that might be strange, like, I don't know. So it depends on the mapping. I tend to agree with Dave, especially if there are supplemental incline, rear incline plane requirements when abutting residential districts, which we have been discussing.
Yeah.
MX4 might not be as scary as some people might think, maybe, right? But that's my only thought there.
Amy?
Yeah, I think that, I'm among the folks who were kind of perplexed to see the MX4 change to MX3 in the first place. And to echo Charlie's point, I do think that, there are some, needles that may be threaded and so forth. And, we've obviously heard comments today from the audience that, some of which were less enthusiastic about, upzoning in general. But this particular issue of the kind of neighborhood scale commercial areas doesn't seem to be one that's receiving much pushback in my observation. And again, I just don't see the need for, I'm having trouble picturing the type of area where 3 would be fine, but 4 isn't. And, I live myself quite close to an area that I think MX4 is targeted for, and that area already has 4-story buildings and some, smattering supply and yeah, just generally, if we're talking about mixed commercial area, why not go for it? Now, if there are certain types of areas where that is too much of a leap from surrounding residential, that's where our RXs come in, right? We can have RX4, RX6 to allow a mix of commercial and residential in more residential, generally speaking, residential areas. But if we're talking about a neighborhood commercial area, 4 should be a minimum. Now, having said that, the second bullet there is, I think, the more important one, and support that that sort of upzoning to 6 and 8 along the corridor, significant intersections, and so on.
Anybody else vote?
Yeah, I was someone who thought that the addition of MX3 was appropriate and a good thing. That there are specifically in Richmond 300, there's at least one neighborhood where it clearly states it's to be limited to 3 stories, and you can't comply with that unless you have a MX3 category. That said, I would not be, the other thing that's good about MX3 is it gives you, and you just said it, Damien, it gives you an ability to taper from lower scale residential to higher. It gives you just another tool. So that said, I kind of like your compromise here. Keep MX3, keep MX4, maybe MX4 is used more than MX3. And I also like, Damien, you made the point, and then one of our speakers made the point I thought quite well, Brock Hall, that maybe what we do need to be doing is, if we're going to upzone, we don't do it with duplexes everywhere. We do it from going from MX3 and 4 to MX6 along these corridors. And that gets you your density, that puts it where it currently is and causes less dislocation in traditional single-family neighborhoods. I'm not going to go down the duplex thing. I've said that enough.
We just have a point of clarification. I think what's being proposed is to keep MX3, not reintroduce MX4, but to use 6 and 8 more, often.
Okay, well, I wouldn't be opposed to both 3 and 4. My comment.
Okay, just a moment. Kendra, did you have a comment? Did I see you raise your hand? Oh, okay, sorry.
Yeah, and I did, think about, and this level of nuance might be for later in the mapping process, but thinking about MX2 versus MX4, I am in support of density. I support MX4. I think that makes sense to me. And I think in these scenarios, we should at some point have conversations around having that, if we find it legal enough, having the incentive towards affordable housing so that people can opt into having an extra story if they're going to do affordable housing there. And that feels like a very fair trade-off. Yes, it might not be the density that people want, but we know we need the affordable housing, and that's just alleviate a separate crisis that we're gonna face. So if MX3 will hurt people's, or MX4 will hurt people's feelings to that degree, then I'm wondering what it could look like for us to use that extra story as an incentive for more affordable housing, and that can feel like a worthwhile payment for that. So yeah, that's all I got.
Thank you. Hey, folks, just remember to announce your names. Dave, did you have comments?
No, I'll let that, I think I said, my comment is pretty straightforward. But I do visualize places where the 3 is just too low. I can think of Cherry Street corridor, I can think of, anything in filling on the boulevard, if there's ever any place, the boulevard already has 4-story buildings in it. Carytown, there are places there where 4 stories would be completely reasonable, but it's 6 is getting a little heavy. 3 is, it's a little light if we want to try and get some, intense mixed-use commercial built in with the commercial areas. Trying to think if I had any other areas that I was thinking about in terms of that. And I think that, as a whole, Richmonders have been aquaphobic for generations. And that aquaphobia comes from zoning from the, previous era, 76 and prior to that, where we were trying to alleviate and prevent density, and height were considered one and the same. So I think once people when people start looking around and seeing 4-story buildings, they'll get more adjusted to the idea of what a 4-story building is. Whether it's on West Gray Street, 6-story building at the Shenandoah building where the new hotel is in the fan. So those heights sound high, but they're not.
So I think that there's some mixed feelings on the MX4 and MX3, and it's just MX4 is the most appropriate, but there are places where probably MX3 fits better with the existing character. Is there any heartburn with the second proposal about MX6 and MX8 and using those along higher density corridors? Any other feedback we want to give Renee?
In my comments, I'll reiterate, I was generally
Charlie.
In my comments, I was generally supportive of zoning our corridors further than they had been mapped in this initial draft. So record show, I'm supportive of that. And furthermore, where, maybe there is some currently mapped MX6 areas that should be MX8 or MX13. My comments, again, to reiterate, could be construed as being supportive of more on the corridors than what was currently shown. So.
Thank you.
I feel pretty much the same, but I have the only conflict I think I have when I think about that briefly is when I think about the Chamberlain corridor. I'm solid on the 4 personally. I think 4 is a nice height. Some of the housing over there I know is part of our culture. Part of we should be looking into the culture and following up on that. It's a little toss in there, by the way. And but if that had to go from 3 to 6 as a stretch, that's a stretch. I support MX6 in lots of places. I support MX8 in lots of places. I support MX13 in lots of places. And right, in large spaces of, where there's commercial zones, certainly can go a lot higher in those spaces.
That was
Thank
Dave.
you. Thank you. Sorry, any other comments? I can't tell if somebody else has their hand up.
Don't see anybody jumping up
Okay.
and down.
Okay, so I'll just say thank you very much. Those are all really good comments. We'll take those into consideration. I would just say, yeah, there's no law that says we can't have MX3, 4, and 6. So the concern is just trying to avoid having a million different zones. So we'll certainly think about that. The comment about incentivizing affordable housing, we are going to get back to that conversation when we get to the development standards portion of this in the next module. So definitely hold that thought. We'll talk about that more later on. Okay, so we shift to the next screen here. So Hopefully this one can be quick. It's a very specific thing and not really related to the mapping, but related to the standards. There were comments about height limits. So we had changed the height limits slightly for RAA and RAC. We lowered them by 5 feet each. And some people felt like that was too limiting. I think some of those lowerings had come at suggestions from staff originally. So I don't know if staff who are in the room want to speak to that first. Just wanted to kind of hear a little bit more about why we changed that or why we might change it back.
Sure. The RAA district is predominantly a single-family duplex district, so the thought is that we keep it at the height of, and coming into districts that are currently a height of 35 feet rather than 40, we didn't see much out of that additional 5 feet that would be needed in that style of development that's permitted in the RAA district. It's also in some of our historic districts where height has been an issue in some of the conversations that we've had, concerns about adding height when there's currently predominantly 30. That's why staff recommended that drop down to the RAA to 35 feet and then a slower increase in height where you're allowing for the more.
Thank you. To Zach members who disagree, just wanted to hear what your thoughts were.
I'll defer to Dave because it's more of an architecture.
So as an architect, I just feel that the 35 feet height is limiting. It's consistently limiting. If you think about floor-to-floor heights in the fan, you might get a 12-foot floor-to-floor height. You might get a 12-foot ceiling in a place, and you might raise it up 3-4 feet above the grade. So by the time you're on floor 2, you're already up to 12, 13, 14 because of construction, 15, 16, 17, 17 feet on the second floor, and you haven't even built the rest of the building. So a lot of times I'm finding that in our special uses, and I think you'll see them in terms of the work that I've done, all of our special uses have exceeded the 35-foot height limit. I might be exaggerating a little bit.
For your single family.
Just for single family or for, just a subdued duplex, I think that happened on West Gray Street, where we did some infill years ago on, what would be the street? There's 1, 2, 3, I think 3 or 4 attached duplexes there where the height, just the buildings adjacent to it were taller. When we put the 3rd floor in, we were above the height limit. On West Carey Street, we were building above the height limit. On the 2200 West Carey, that's above the height limit. Just so many places where that extra few feet makes a big difference. And when you take a look, when I did my, in addition to my house, the fan, it was 37 feet, and it was just, that was the height of the house. That's what we needed to do. So we had to do a special use we had to incorporate that. Then in terms of multifamily, I think you can also produce really higher quality just to get that extra square footage.
I think a lot of the places you're mentioning,
Jennifer.
I just have one sentence. I think a lot of places you're mentioning are places that would not be RAA under this map.
Right.
So that wouldn't be the 40, it would be.
Yeah. So this is Morgan Hill, like there's one neighborhood.
How tall are the houses in Windsor Park?
There'd be RTA.
Oh,
This is the residential
Oh.
attached lowest density.
Oh, yeah,
So
then
allowing
definitely.
1, 2 dwelling units.
This is Jennifer Mullen. I think my concern was predominantly with the RAC. Again, similar comment to Dave's. By lowering the height, you're really trying to artificially lower the stories when in reality you could have a nicer building with that extra height. I mean, most of my special uses all have 1 to 2 feet extra in height, and we're trying to eliminate special uses when really what you're talking about is stories and making it a high quality place.
I think our main concern was the height of the RAA. And then we were slowly incrementally increasing, so everything kind of went down a little bit, not as.
Are there other neighborhoods, other than Morgan Hill that have expressed concerns? It's hard to tell the color.
Not yet. What would you say, Ryan? But we were looking at the RA, anticipating Renee would put this question out to us.
And this is Elizabeth, but for point of clarity, when you say neighbors that have expressed concern, only the advisory committee was commenting on the map. So
Right.
is this expressed concern in other forums? Okay.
One thing, if I can just clarify, this is Preston Lloyd. It's not just new construction that would fall under this. If you have an existing structure that is already constructed over the height that is now the max, that means that that individual, that homeowner, is not going to be able to expand their home without coming in and getting some sort of additional authorization or permit. So it's important that folks who aren't necessarily well versed in zoning understand that these regulations don't just implicate new constructions. They also implicate if you want to do an addition on your home. If we boxed in and made it a standard that's less than your existing home, you may not be able to expand it.
And I'll say, this is Marion. The RAA, I'm looking at the pattern book, there wasn't much where non-conforming front height of 35 feet. So that was why we were making for that.
This is Elizabeth, and probably, you know, I think what I'm hearing is that the changes should be reversed.
Yeah, I mean, this is Charlie. RAA is an inherently dense district and it has things like a lack of lot width minimum. It has stuff that will encourage density. And while I might have a more laissez-faire approach to how development ordinances should be written generally, that's probably not a secret at this point. I can understand what the intent is in doing this. I just wonder from an enforcement perspective, is it the actual height? That's today's point. You might have a fantastic house that just chooses to have a 12-foot first story, 10-foot second story, 10-foot third story. You take the floor plate, you take the foundation, you've exceeded it because you wanted to do a airier, nicer building. I just wonder if there's a way to draft it to make that. I mean, personally, I'm not that worried about it, but I'm just throwing an idea out there. If it's story height quality versus actual building height. Just commentary.
Yeah, this is Elizabeth. Are there any comments on this section for Renee? Because he's got a lot of feedback he's looking for us. We're on what, number 2 or 3?
Yeah.
We've got minutes to go. Okay.
I think that's all good. Yeah, thank you.
Institutional.
Yeah, those are all good comments. Thank you. So to institutional zoning, this is maybe a little bit more of a niche one, so let's maybe not spend too much time on this, but there was some confusion around the minimum 1 acre size for institutional, and taking a look at the map, I think we were maybe a little bit confused about it as well, in the sense that there was, you know, do you calculate that as like a single lot? If there's multiple adjacent lots, let's say a church and a parking lot that are separate properties, you know, do they count together or separately? What if one of them is across the street? And there was also some questions separately from that about how we'd handle residential uses in institutional districts. I think just to clarify, you know, the first part, I think we should probably remove the minimum 1 acre size. That was really more of a kind of rule of thumb for us. So the idea is that smaller institutional uses, you know, a very small church or whatnot, would be just part of whatever its surrounding zoning is, usually neighborhood, usually residential, or could be mixed use. But larger ones, you know, will require a special zone, essentially, let's say for, you know, larger schools or larger hospitals or whatever. And it really was just about, you know, just calling out this very large institutional uses separately. I don't think that 1 acre is necessarily magical, and the minimum lot size is really more about, when we have minimum lot sizes, it's usually something that's more associated with residential lots where you're creating new lots. Here it was more of a kind of rule of thumb for just where we applied it on the map. So I think we may strike that and just continue to use it as sort of a rough rule of thumb, but not have that, you know, specific number. And I think that we will maybe reconsider some places, at least where it's been applied to multiple lots. So, you know, if you have, again, like a church on one side of the street and a parking lot on the other side of the street, and it's surrounded by residential neighborhoods, even if those two things add up to like slightly more than 1 acre, it might make more sense for it to get a residential type zoning. Just thinking about, you know, the long-term future use, if that church were to go away, we probably would want it to go back into a more residential direction, rather than saying it have to be institutional. So that's just a thought. It's kind of a more technical thing, The other part about residential uses, I maybe would put that back out to you guys and just ask for anybody who had concerns around residential uses in institutional districts, or other questions, maybe to elaborate on that. So both, go ahead.
Yeah, this is Eric. I think I left that comment, and yeah, I think what you mentioned does work for me. I think just generally, I did not want to see particular church property owners, have to go through any kind of rezoning process or whatever challenges. If they did want to redevelop their properties as housing, we certainly are seeing a lot of vacant church properties throughout the city, and there's certainly opportunities for housing on those properties. And so just reducing barriers for that would be great. In terms of how residential uses in institutional districts would be handled, yeah, I guess my question to that is, if there is a church on the property and then they also have housing on the property, does that remain as an institutional zoning district? Or if the church is no longer present, would it simply have to become a residential district in that case? So that's probably getting to the administrative side of things, but
yeah.
Thank you, Eric. Philip?
Yeah, I have a question about this issue. So if you allowed residential uses around churches, that seems to be what we're talking about. What would the standards be to those residential uses? Would they be compatible with the neighborhoods, or would there be some other? Would there be no limits? What would the restrictions, if any, be on church-owned residential? Churches, the church could build something and then the church goes, churches go out of business, merge, move, whatever. And I would think that what you want is residential housing that's compatible with what's around it. But I guess that's really more of a question to you guys. I don't really understand all the ins and outs of this issue.
Yeah, I would maybe put that, if Colin's in the line right now. Colin, do you want to speak to some of the specifics of uses that we're thinking about right now?
Well, residential is one of them, and I think, to the extent, ideally, we'd want the residential to match the character and intensity of the surrounding development. So.
Okay, all right.
I guess it is sort of two things in the sense that it could be, accessory residential, which is the more traditional, thing you'd see in an institutional zone. That's like the manse or whatever for a church, and maybe a limited amount of sort of nonprofit housing or something that's associated with that, or it could be, housing associated with a university or something like that. Versus, if that use were to fully go away, and it was to be changed into, typical normal residential, probably in that case, you want to get a rezoning. But
this is Jennifer Mullen. I guess on a similar vein, I disagree that the housing necessarily needs to be in the same pattern as the residential neighborhood. You're talking about institutional uses that are, and you've mapped it on larger parcels. I think it's an opportunity where some already exists, where you have more intense residential use that's in a apartment style or a dorm style. I mean, you've got U of R on here down on the other end. I mean, there's all kinds of different residential uses. So today there is a master plan that goes along with an institutional use that as you add buildings, because you want those institutions to be flexible, so they don't have the same standards. It's through their master plan. So it's, I would say they don't get a different overlay than the regular residential would, but I would be inclined to allow them to have, I think even in your map, you can go up in more density, which I think is appropriate. Yeah. Particularly churches have missions of affordable housing or senior housing or, those types of things, as well as schools have different residential components that go along with just their institutional nature.
agree with everything she just said.
I agree also. This is Wayne Cradle. I'm a church consultant, so churches mean a lot to me. And many churches are absolutely changing their spaces to create housing or schools, daycares, et cetera, even gyms. And so being able to do that without having too much of a hassle, I think would be a great idea. Many times church leaders are not, they may not always have access or always understand what does it mean to even navigate SUPs and things of that nature. And so I think it's a great idea to allow that right.
Thank you. Do we have it, Councilwoman Robertson?
Thank you. As it relates to churches, I agree with the conversation. There's a lot. You already named me, so I did say, thank you. You know, there is a lot of energy out here as it relates to churches as opportunities for redevelopment of their parcels. So I really would like to see the zoning allows for a lot more density and for those kinds of opportunities. I do think that we need to be a little sensitive to some churches in the city, but few of them I think that are really tucked into the community have a lot of extra land, so it may not be an issue for those churches anyway. But many of our churches are on our more busy quarters, and so with the extra land, and they give us an opportunity. And I want to go back to the residential zoning, just to say one of the things that really concerns me is that the increase in density in the residential neighborhoods seems to be overly influenced in neighborhoods that that are in the process of being massively gentrified. And it seems as if we are willing to look at upzoning RDC in neighborhoods that are the farther part of the East End and lower part of South Side. But once you get to other sectors of the community going west, we are not looking at the same level of opportunity. And I think what we're failing to recognize in that process, when we upzone to RD in a single family neighborhood like Highland Park, for example, one lot, I have a developer right now telling me based on the zoning, they could actually subdivide that one lot into 3 lots and put 21 units on it, housing. And that seems, this zoning that we see in the residential density seem to be being found more favorable in neighborhoods that are historically African-American communities, and also historically communities that may have been disenfranchised by redlining, the financial institution, and all of the other kinds of challenges that we have. And so it speaks to the consciousness of the city of Richmond and where we have always been willing to put density. And we fail to recognize this approach without any restrictions on value, 21 units in one block at a rate of a value of $400,000 per unit increases the total value of a community. And what we've seen in some of the neighborhoods, especially African-American communities, housing opportunity did a detailed study for us in the 3rd district and in the 5th district, where those prices have displaced up to 15 and 25% of African-American families. And so what we fail to recognize when we put 21 units on a block, on a site, because there's no restriction as to the area size of the lot. And if they're going at $300,000 per unit, it increases the whole assessment value for the whole neighborhood. and we're leading to a tremendous amount of displacement, not only of existing homeowners, but also rental housing opportunities. So when we look at density, I think it's very important that we pay more attention to the disparity that we can see in this map just by looking at the color of the map, okay? That, you know, we're looking at highly increasing the density in some residential neighborhoods and protecting others that once you get into neighborhoods that predominantly not minority neighborhoods, we'll be able to maintain their current values and therefore have less displacement. And I really do feel like there's a huge disparity in the zoning, the way that you're looking at the maps at the present time. And I seriously would ask us to go back and reconsider this. Thank you.
So,
Thank you.
yeah,
Renee?
yeah, I think maybe, so we're jumping to a bit of a different topic, but I think maybe I'd actually like to hear like a little bit more from the councilwoman on this, because we certainly don't want to do what you're suggesting. So I'm wondering if, Jonathan, if you're there, do you want to bring up the map on the screen? I just want to understand a little bit more about specifically where you're thinking. Jonathan or Colin, are you there? Thank you.
And then I can't raise, oh, now I can. I'll do that.
Go ahead, Maritza.
I wanted just to quickly just echo Councilwoman Robertson's concerns about how the impact on tax assessments, because I think that most likely would happen and would impact families that are on limited incomes, and would probably make it hard for people to age in place, you know, because their Social Security checks and retirement wouldn't increase that to be able to cover the taxes. So that's just, I think that is a really valid point you make, Councilwoman Robertson.
May I, Councilman Robertson, and I agree with you, but I want to also emphasize that frequently when we use the terms of low income, we tend to want to think that that is folk that are making $25,000, $50,000 a year. We're talking about 80% of the people that the city pay payroll to that cannot afford $500,000 homes. And if we allow the density in these attached rezoning that we're doing in many of the residential communities at the level that we're talking about, with no restriction on the area size of the lots, and also other development standards that we're putting in place, we're talking about the majority of the people that work for the city of Richmond probably not being able to afford to live in the city. And bigger than that, what I'm concerned about, even in the commercial areas on the map, whereas if you're in Highland Park, that is known more like, still is thought to be a predominantly African-American community, RX4 is easily accepted. But if you start going the other direction toward the West End, you know, we are talking about, you know, RX3 is like, oh, no way, right? But when you come back into the north and the south side, the map is truly showing disparity as it relates to opportunities within the entire city for folk to live. And I want to protect the integrity of single-family communities. I do. I think it's important. I think there's opportunities for zoning to be at certain locations to provide the amenities and so forth. I want a coffee shop at the corner and those kinds of things. I want some retail. But if we are going to try to increase density by just doing it in residential zones in certain neighborhoods at a maximum number to increase our development, and be very sparing in our commercial corridors, not allowing more than 3 stories, then this map is not designed to provide the level of density inclusion that it needs to allow itself to provide, and is putting a huge burden on neighborhoods that are currently enjoying single-family zoning by maximizing the opportunity for zoning within single-family residential communities. And I think that is not reflective of the mission that the city of Richmond needs to dance to the music and recognize that we have quarters that have 2-story duplex buildings or multifamily that really should never be less than 6 or more. And I don't see that in this zoning that we have in West.
So I'm going to pause right there and thank you to the councilwoman for opening up a very important topic. And I know that one we've been kind of going back and forth on of densities in certain areas of the city versus others. Renee, I know you want to pull up the map, which you have. Charlie has a comment. Renee, did you get what you need from us on the industrial, or excuse me, the institutional?
Yeah, I think we can move on. Yeah, I think this is
What I'm
basically
gonna
the topic
do-
that was.
What I'm going to do is I'm going to jump ahead and move over to page 11, where we're talking about increases and decreases in density. I think that this probably
Let's do it.
fits right into the conversation that Councilwoman Robertson's had. I know you want her to point to more specific areas of the map that she's referencing, and before we get to that, I think Charlie has a question or a comment, and then if Councilwoman, by then maybe Councilwoman Robertson can map specifics. Does that sound good?
That's good.
Okay, Charlie.
Yeah, nothing major to add. I agree with a lot of what Councilman Robertson said. Just what do we do in response to that would be the question. And I do feel like there could be a more uniform application of some zoning districts based on, some things that do stick out as racial, economic, and class differences, and how some neighborhoods were mapped versus others. But, this is just a draft, and I credit y'all for working through our sensitivities here in the city of Richmond. I know we're a unique animal. I think Eric has his hand up. Since
Yeah, didn't know if you needed a response from the team, but in the absence of that, Eric, why don't you unmute yourself and give from your comments?
Sure. This is Eric Mai. I would just continue to echo Councilwoman Robertson's comments, specifically about equity. And again, I think one of the public comments mentioned, there is this affordable housing plan that City Council adopted, and the title of this plan is an equitable affordable housing plan. And one of those recommendations from that plan is to amend the zoning ordinance to allow up to 3 family homes in all single family districts. And that is, a matter of equity and opportunity. And I think this is a rare opportunity to address that. We're certainly seeing other localities across Virginia be a lot bolder in their zoning ordinance rewrites. Arlington, Alexandria, Charlottesville, even the city of Roanoke, they're doing transformative things with their zoning ordinance. And Charlottesville in particular elevates racial equity as a guiding principle in their zoning ordinance rewrite. And I really would, stress, that we do the same thing, especially with Richmond's history. That's it. Thank you.
Yes, Stephen.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a kind of general observation that builds off of some of what I think I'm understanding from what the councilwoman is saying. We entered into this process, as do all cities who are grappling with zoning reform, from the premise that there's a supply and demand problem, and that the reason why our housing costs are getting out of control is because we don't have enough units in the places, the cities and communities and regions where people want to live. And so the sort of conclusion there is we need more units across the board to reduce housing costs across the board. But we keep running up against is concerns which are valid, and that, you know, what we see is that oftentimes when we see these new units being built, they are expensive, right? So how do we sort of grapple with the idea that at the macro scale, we need more units to increase supply relative to demand and suppress the increase in housing costs across the board, with the concern that, you know, the councilwoman is expressing from her perspective in her neighborhood, and others have also expressed in other neighborhoods, that new housing tends to be expensive, right? And the one, and you know, I don't have a resolution to that other than to point out that, you know, it's one thing to say that new development is expensive relative to the old pre-existing development that was in that same neighborhood, but it's not necessarily more expensive compared to what new development could be built under the existing zoning, right? We see this all the time in Northside and sort of outer Churchill type areas where new supposed SUPs are being approved for new denser housing that is more expensive than anything that's already existing in the neighborhood, but probably much less expensive per housing unit than what could have been built under the base zoning without the SUP, right? So we need to figure out how to rectify all that. That again, the general concept is supposed to be that more units means lower prices, but then we have these sort of neighborhood-based concerns that new units are higher priced, right? So how do we deal with all that?
Charlie Wilson, building off of that. Yeah, I'd say that the vast majority of my office's work has historically been single-family infill throughout the city of Richmond's neighborhoods, Highland Park, like where I live as well. Churchill, a lot of places that they're attractive because you know, that the market does want them to some extent, but they're also attractive because they're attractive for our office's perspective. The zoning is bad and the market requests it, right? So we have to go through processes like special use permits, a variety of other mechanisms to get them authorized. What I will say is, like, you could ask pretty much any one of my client and they'll say, hey, client, you can do one house buy right today. You can sell it however, you can be as nice as you want, as expensive as you want, or you can go through a process and sell smaller houses at a lesser cost. You'll spend less money building them because they're going to be smaller. They might have less higher end finishes, right? And this is anecdotal, right? But I'm just, if we're talking loosely about this right now, I will say I observe that people are willing to go through processes. If they're willing to go through processes to build smaller houses, that would tell me, absent the process, they would definitely build those smaller houses so that they could have a greater economy of scale. So just an anecdote for the record.
In response to Damien's point about if you got new units coming on that are more expensive than the existing stock, it still absolutely helps. If you've got, say you've got a condo building and it's 100 units in there and they're selling for $750 each, there's not a ton of people that are going to be, not a ton percentage of the population to be in the market for a $750,000 condo, but they're going to move out of somewhere else into that condo, and it makes everything that it's competing against just a little bit less desirable on the open market because this brand new shiny thing is out there, and it provides downward pressure on the pricing around it.
Thank you. Renee, I know that you wanted to look at some specific areas. I don't want to put Councilwoman Robertson on the spot, but if I mean, I think
Every time I hear that, it seems like I get the spot.
Yeah, you certainly don't have to. I mean, we could just take a look at it again, or you can give us some more general comments. But I just wanted to give you an opportunity if you wanted to zoom into a particular spot and let us know about some area that you thought was getting the wrong zoning. Happy to
I
hear
think
it.
we're all aware of, and this is Elizabeth, of the areas that are not getting the levels of density, and they're probably more in the western end of the city, where we've spent a lot of time going over the duplex, triplex, accessory unit conversation. So I think that's the easy area to say where the density is not going.
Right.
Yeah.
So my comments is about where we are placing density, where we are focusing on increasing density in residential zones for, I attached as well as detached, and the increase in especially attached. And where in other sectors of the city we are not. The mission is to increase the opportunity for density throughout the city. And when we look at the map, we don't even have to look at the zoning. We can just look at the color of the map. The color by itself tells us the color aligns with maps that were done 30 years ago. Then they were redline neighborhoods, right? And when we look at the color on these maps, we can see where the increased density we are providing. And I am suggesting that there are areas throughout the city that without putting that burden of creating the density that we want in the city, just in residential areas where the map is showing us where we're placing most of the density, but allowing ourselves to take advantage of these major quarters and not stop this restriction of 3 stories and all of these other kinds of things that allow us the opportunity to deal with height, and some opportunities that exist there can be very effectively and attractively done on a major transportation corridors and so forth, as the 300 plan has identified. You know, I'm looking at some of the zoning. Some of the zoning is, I have to get you more clarity because I don't know why some of our major zones, some of our major residential zones are not looking, that we're really concentrating in certain sectors of the city and not in other things. I mean, that's basically my argument. So to deal with costs and affordability, I do think there's other policies that's going to have to be put in place that the city and other places have done to help us to increase our affordability. The market is the market. It's going to be the market. We know that. That's not the greatest argument that I'm making right now. The greatest argument is where we are showing a willingness to increase density is not, it is not equitable. It is concentrated, and it follows the principles of the existing zoning of the city of Richmond.
Thank you. Based on Damien, sorry.
Yeah, just to, if I, so in terms of the areas that you're speaking to where you're seeing density being increased, you're, from understanding, you're focusing more on kind of the existing residential parts, not the commercial corridors of those neighborhoods, right?
I'm focusing on particularly the residential because I think that's where people live.
Yeah.
That's where we're going to have the greatest challenge. And I don't think that we should make residential communities bear that burden. When we have major corridors that we're seeing MX3 on, when they absolutely could be higher density than that. We're not willing to negotiate.
But yeah, and I think a lot of us are echoing your points on that latter part. The places, so we're talking about residential neighborhoods in, let's say, the East End and North Side, where on this proposed map, I'm seeing a lot of RDC and RAA. Are those,
Yes.
those are, you
Yes.
perceive that to be an increase in density over what's in those neighborhoods currently?
Yes, and I see it being a burden on particular residential neighborhoods and not on other residential neighborhoods equally.
And my understanding is that I'm not just, I would like to hear with consultants if they perceive RAA and RDC in those types of neighborhoods to be reflective of the current density or an increase over the current density.
So you're asking us?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that generally speaking, so the approach that we've taken right now is basically, we hope to follow the direction of the plan. So for residential areas that are considered residential in Richmond 300, they would normally get RD, some kind of RD zoning. And in terms of which kind, it's mostly based on, I guess, 2 factors. One of them is the existing zoning, some version of that. So we don't want to generally speaking, we don't want to go below the existing zoning if you're already allowed to do a certain thing. And then the other one is the existing lotting pattern. So the introduction of RDC was really meant to make conforming some areas that have unusually small lots that right now are out of conformity. So it's mostly about trying to bring that up into conformity. It's not really supposed to be about taking areas that are where everybody has a larger lot and allowing them to divide it up into a whole bunch of small lots. Might happen on the odd property, but mostly it's about just bringing those small lot neighborhoods into conformity. So that's the intention behind it. But again, we can certainly take a look at it again.
Charlie and then Philip?
Yeah. Ms. Robson, I share the concern of the possible impact of RDC on these neighborhoods where they're shown on the map. I think it does create an incentive for developers to purchase less expensive lots and to convert them into much denser uses, which could have a bad impact on your district, the single family neighborhoods in your district that I know are important to you. I don't think that spreading RDC to other parts of the city is going to lessen that impact because of the dollars and cents issues. You could put RDC in the most expensive parts of the city, and the cost of land would be such that people wouldn't develop. And if you look at the studies that are coming out of Charlottesville, they are not seeing affordable housing. They're not seeing duplexes built. You look at Minneapolis, they had a 12% increase in units, but it came from apartments being built, not duplexes and things like this. So I agree with your concern. I think the problem is RDC. The lowest currently, R5 is our most dense residential district right now, and it's 50 feet wide. So by chopping that in half with RDC, we're dramatically increasing the incentive that if a developer can find an affordable lot, they're going to take that and chop that in half. So I think the problem is RDC. I think we ought to reconsider that, maybe make the lease width back at 50 feet. That would prevent that kind of thing from happening in your district as well as others. So I just throw that out to the staff and to the consultants to consider rethinking this sort of dramatic new district.
Yeah, Charlie speaking. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's fair to put this on like a residential versus commercial. Like, it's not a dichotomy. I feel like it can do both. Like, our answers can be yes to both. R5, I would argue, was maliciously used in my neighborhood, Highland Park, in a bad way to restrict generational landowners from developing their property in a manner exactly consistent with how it's been developed. So RDC, while I personally don't think RDC goes enough, and that's why it might be problematic, RDC is certainly a step in the right direction for some of these neighborhoods that were mapped intentionally poorly, to say. With that, I feel like something that might be useful that there is precedent for already that maybe we can do more of on the map. There was throughout, Easton, South Side, everywhere, there was a lot of moments where there was a major street that didn't actually get upzoned respective to the inner parts of the neighborhood. So maybe that would be a good place to start, going back to that. There's precedent for that in Richmond 300. Asking parts of like the Cherokee neighborhood to not be RDA, but instead RDB because they're on Cherokee. Is that really going to do that much? I'm not sure, but it's at least a step in the right direction, and it's a better guardrail that I think, there's precedent for with Richmond 300. So anyway,
And just to be clear, it sounds like the issue here is strictly one of lot width, right? Because unless I'm looking at something dated on the allowed use table, neither RDB nor RAA allow anything beyond the same number of units per parcel as everywhere else in the city, right? So it's just a matter of lot width that we're
It's also, you know, setbacks as well, which are sort of downstream from lot width. But yeah, that's the primary thing.
And while we're, so one more thing adding on to, since we're talking about RDC specifically, there were parts of, and cherry picking, so apologies. I know it's easy for us to sit here and just lob things at you.
Helpful.
But there were parts of Greater Churchill at the periphery that got RDC. When I feel like the Richmond 300 neighborhood mixed use classification should have necessitated something a cut above that. And there was a neighborhood like the Oakwood Chimborazo neighborhood. You see attached houses through there. Are they the precedent? No, but they would become, their nonconformity would be perpetuated by this. So I'm wondering if they're, again, whether it's using the major street designation as the impetus to upzone something a notch above, which we previously talked about, or massaging RAA somehow to be more useful or compatible there. Just commentary. RDC has its place for sure. It's just where do you put it, and you know, how does it actually affect the people that live there? So
Hey, Renee, I'm going to take a comment from Dave and then we'll turn it back to you.
Thanks.
So then, if we're thinking of this as limiting and divisive, then the idea of maybe just going, you know, funneling back a little bit and talking about 2 units or 3 units per lot, plus, you know, accessory dwelling. And I think that's really something that we should focus on for the whole city. And I know the whole city is going, well, we can't have that because there could be too many people living here. I don't know what the issue is, but I know that having been on some house tours recently and also living up in a more dense city where my daughter and her husband and their brother are looking to do multi-generational type of housing where families can be on a same lot in the same building. That's something that's a prospect that could be a level playing field, correct?
I think the comment as it relates to the footage of the front and the space between has a lot to do with helping us, especially if we're going to say there is no restriction as it relates to the area of the lot itself. And then I do think that my neighbors has bought all 3 lots behind me. She lives there and her 2 sons and her mother.
Multi-generational, right.
Multi-generation. And it's perfect. It's absolutely perfect. And that's the value of Richmond in our communities that we truly enjoy. And I just don't want my desire for density to be exceptionally increased in the city and allow for people to live in different neighborhoods throughout the city to end up with a map that shows the highest level of density being in residential communities due to splitting of lots without any regulatory controls as to how many units can be put over there. And that's what this map tells me.
It might be worth looking at, and this is Brian White, sorry, might be worth looking at how much of this increased permitted density in some of these residential neighborhoods is trying to bring the existing housing stock into compliance with the zoning. There are a ton of neighborhoods right now where, you know, the zoning says you got to have a 50-foot wide lot, and pretty much every house has a 30-foot wide lot. And they're trying to make that zoning so that those houses are now conforming. And if, I don't know, but I suspect that a lot of it is that, where they're trying to you know, make the existing development pattern in there compatible with them.
Yeah, maybe I can just say something to that. Like, I think that's primarily, like I said before, the intention is to try and remove the nonconformities, because right now, if you're in a situation where you have a lot that's less than 50 feet and your zoning says 50 feet, then you're fundamentally out of conformity. You have to get an SUP to do almost anything. And so the hope is to try and bring those into conformity. The more difficult thing, which I think is maybe the debate that we need to revisit with the map, is the threshold for how those lots get mixed. So let's say you have a neighborhood where you've got some lots in the block are 50 feet wide and some are 30 feet wide. Generally speaking, because we didn't want to make it really spotty, we kind of went with the lower number. And so that means that, yes, in some cases you could have larger lots on a block where somebody could split a larger lot. And so we tried to make it not too granular. So we were kind of, applying this to kind of larger areas. We could look at changing the thresholds and make it a little bit more granular to sort of, allow those areas to be in conformity while not necessarily allowing people to split up a lot of lots in other adjacent areas. So I think that's certainly one thing I would revisit based on this conversation, maybe.
Renee, based on all the other conversation you've heard, are there any other thoughts or suggestions? I don't want to rush this. This is a very important conversation, but we have 30 minutes left and a lot of areas we're trying to get some more feedback on the map on.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm perfectly fine continuing to talk about density because I think it's very important one, but I want to make sure that we're getting to all the other topics as well. Where would the group like to, you want to continue this? No, Councilman Roberts, stay and move on. Okay. Renee, is there any other comments or things, feedback that you need from this group based on this conversation to go back and work more on the map?
I don't think on this topic. I think we've basically touched on a few different. Let me put the presentation back on the screen. We touched on a few different topics that were in the presentation today, so I think that's great. One of them was major corridors, which a few people made comments on just now. So I think we had comments on the map earlier that we had discussion about this already in previous meetings about how we were going to upzone those corridors. The way we kind of landed was that we only upzoned corridors that were also enhanced, major streets that were also enhanced transit corridors. And some people felt that should be applied more broadly to other major streets. So I think based on this conversation, we may go back and take a look at some of those other major streets and think about, maybe some more gentle upzoning that could happen along there. And maybe that, counterbalances, taking down some of the zoning within the interior of neighborhoods. So those are maybe just some thoughts about conversation we just had. And there were some specific comments that we got about maybe increasing density on certain corridors specifically on the map. So we can take a look at those again when we go back and make revisions based on people's, site-specific comments. So I think I would maybe just move on to some other topics if that's okay.
You want to go back? We didn't make it to transitions and buffers.
Yeah, let's do that. Yeah, so I think transitions and buffers, we had a number of comments about looking at zones beside each other where there was differences in height that were substantial. We've previously presented some just like conceptual transition standards to you. I know we haven't really kind of put this in the draft yet, so this is going to become part of the development standards portion, which is the next module. But I think that just to say, generally speaking, when you have permission to, let's say, build a 6-story building, it doesn't mean you can build it all the way to your back property line. If there's a neighborhood behind you, there's going to have to be some sort of transition, which involves a setback, and it may involve stepping of taller buildings as well. So just generally, I would just say that. I think we talked about that a little bit before. And I just want to make sure that people understanding that people feel comfortable with that approach, or if there's maybe more specifics that we want to raise around transitions. The second part of this is use transitions between industrial and residential areas in particular. So there's not that many areas this happens, but there are a few places where there are industrial and residential zones that come directly up against each other. We would definitely want to see some sort of buffering standard applied in those, where there's a setback and a landscaped area around the outside, so you're not putting your industrial building right up to the property line. But I would just put this out to you guys and just see if there's any further comments or specifics you want to raise about either one of these topics, either height or use, transitions, and buffers.
Any comments? Anybody that made this comment? Any specific concerns you want to address with Renee while he's with us? All right, Hearing
No,
none,
good.
we're gonna-
Okay,
I'm gonna
okay,
move
it's
on
fine.
to preservation of views.
Preservation of views. So I know that early in this process, we heard a little bit about specific views, like from the hill over the river and so forth. I think I'm not talking so much about that. I think that could be, that will be achieved with just where you apply zones in the map, and hopefully we've done that. There were some comments more about sort of a sense of feeling boxed in certain places and not having enough, views of the skyline of the sky. Maybe also of the river. That you have these existing RF, so-called RF riverfront districts that limit building length, with the idea of, I think, preserving some views to the river. After discussing this with staff, we were thinking about an approach where, generally speaking, not even in one spot on the map, but maybe a number of spots, we introduce a maximum length for built form elements above the 4th story. So this would apply to any zones where you could have more than 4 stories. So the upper stories of those zones would have a maximum length. And the idea here is separate from the maximum length of the overall building. So to prevent people from building, very long slab type buildings, tall buildings. Not quite sure what that maximum length is going to be yet. We need to think about it a little bit more, but that would kind of break up larger buildings and allow for a little bit more sunlight and sky views. So I just wanted to put this out to you and see what you thought about that approach, what your reactions are.
Seen some facial reactions.
For-
Anyone want to chime in?
For
Charlie?
purpose of discussion, what length, what length, was it a number thrown out? Was it 50 feet, 250 feet? I feel like that's an important thing to understand if we talk about this.
Colin, do you recall the number that we were talking about? We were thinking about a couple of different numbers.
250.
250, okay.
250. Right now there is a maximum building length for the entire building, but you can do a significant articulation or courtyard, and so you can continue that building. And so we were just thinking through this idea that if we wanted to preserve views, having an absolute maximum building length at something like 250 feet at 4 stories and above, and then setting a distance, whether that's 15 feet, 20 feet, 30 feet before you start a new upper story, building facade, I guess.
Do we have any comments from our architect? I'm sorry, I'm putting them on the spot, but again, I'm reading some faces around the room. Any comments, Dave? Looking for the architect here.
Right. There's a little more spatial than that, I think, on a big scale. I don't have a number. 250 feet seems wide to me, and a 20-foot gap in between them seems a little small. I think there are some vista preservation areas that are fairly important when it comes to the waterfront or views to the skyline back and forth across the river. And I'm not sure about sun shading and where that comes into effect. The only one I can think of offhand is Vancouver has a sun shading system there, don't they? Where they develop a plinth and they put the tower on top of the plinth, and that has a certain amount of space for sun, but they're much further north and the impact of sun is a lot different. But I would like to see some preservation of views so that we can actually see through our city as we develop it. So if we look at a large area of 10, let's say more than 12, 15, 13, more than 13 stories, it would be important, I think. 13 stories maybe, just to have some preservation. Just in some certain districts, I think the Riverfront District is an important one.
I'll weigh in. I very much appreciate the comments of our design professionals around the table. I'll just share anecdotally from experience that I've had in doing a project that was proposed on the riverfront. It was in an RF district, which of course had these requirements as part of the base zoning regulation. And what it meant was that the project had to come in for an SCP because the architects couldn't do what the density required based on the value of that land and where it was located. It was too restrictive. And yet when you looked at if we even had built it according to what the by right restrictions provided, there really was no preservation of sight lines because the best sight lines of the river are typically down the axes of the public rights of way. That's what gives you the best sort of open view of the river. And so what it was only doing was potentially raising an argument about what was the view going to be from the restaurant that was located on the other side of this particular property. And so it became really more of an argument between two private property owners as to what one believed they had in terms of view shed rights over the other property. And from my perspective, that's not really the role of the zoning ordinance. And so I think that if we try to create a one-size-fits-all view shed kind of component of this, we're setting ourselves up for a lot of SCPs. Because we're going to have design professionals coming in saying, this doesn't work for this particular site. And so now I have to plead my case as to why what I'm ultimately going to give you is going to have a great visual presence of the architecture, but also not interfering with sight lines of the river or whatever the desired sight line would be. So again, long way of saying I would avoid including these standards as base requirements unless there's a very specific view shed that needs to be protected. And in that specific instance, then figure out what are the heights that are appropriate to make sure that it's not encroached upon.
And we would need, Brian White, we would need those views understood and defined ahead of time. You can't have people claiming rights to something every time something is proposed.
Yeah, that makes sense to me, but I think, and like everybody else, I think this is an important issue. I think one of the worst buildings built in Richmond in my lifetime is that, I don't know, it still carries its flag, but that Crown Plaza Hotel, it's right at the end of Fifth Street, at the bottom of the hill, or maybe it's 4th Street. But that building wiped out the view of the James River. And so for a generation, we've been looking at that square box hotel. This idea of 4 stories having some gaps, I mean, I think the architects really have to weigh in on that, but I just look out the window here and we have a lot of broken pediments and different shapes, and it's a much more interesting thing than the new buildings being built down Broad Street that are just boxes that look like they have their inside on the outside, that are just, you know, monolithic 8-story buildings. I think we can do better. I think we can do better than that. And this might be a way to do it.
Charlie, if it is being pursued, I think we just need to understand what the numbers are, because in Preston's case, the numbers themselves were the problem. I'm not dismissing the view of our river shed, but
I just threw it out as a comment, and just thought about it a little bit. But I will reinforce your comment about the tops of buildings and having them be reasonable.
We're going to talk about that tomorrow at the working group.
Oh, this is Jennifer. I think I would just like to echo Preston's comments, because it's, you know, even if you look at the parcels along the river, none of them are a similar shape. So it's not possible for a number to work.
Any other comments? Renee, any?
Yeah. No, I think those are all good comments. I think we're just trying to understand specifically which problem we're trying to solve here. Like, are we trying to? I guess there's 2 ways you could do it. If it's a specific view in a specific place that you want to preserve, you could either, you know, apply different zones, different heights accordingly, or you could have a kind of overlay that just says thou shalt not build more than a certain amount in this place geographically. Or if it's more of a generic thing about just, you know, preventing a feeling of being boxed in and not having buildings look too bulky, then the approach is more like what we suggested. So I'm not quite sure. I need to think about which one of these problems we're really solving. And I don't know if anybody has any other thoughts around that. Is it really about specific views from specific places, or is it about a sort of a general sense of openness?
I would vote the latter, as Brian White, that feeling boxed in is the important thing. I think if we try to figure out what view is important to everybody in this city, we're not gonna get anywhere.
I agree with that.
Okay. Okay, so we'll think about this some more.
Except all views are.
So if you don't mind, just moving to the next topic here. I think we may have sort of addressed this, the infill zoning strategy. Oh, sorry, am I talking over somebody? Okay, yeah, just concerns about balancing development of vacant lots and preserving sites. There are some areas where we looked at some of the existing buildings, and then we looked at vacant lots nearby, and there was some kind of, I think we're thinking about maybe the East End in particular, there's some variance between what the plan was suggesting and what some of the kind of historic fabric was. There may be other parts of the city where this happened as well, but some people felt like it looked a little bit spotty on the map in terms of, sort of going back and forth from different heights. I guess, not sure if there's any, for those who commented on this particular topic, you want to maybe just add some more explanation?
Brian?
Well, yeah, that, I was one of the people that made one of those comments. And I think I put my little button down there in Chaco Bottom when I made it.
Yeah.
Where you've got, the master plan calls for most of that area to be, it's destination mixed use and calls for it to be a priority growth node. Well, how are we going to grow and how is it going to become destination mixed use if we can't add height to the existing buildings? If we're going to be honest and respect the land use designations of the master plan, we can't say, MX3 because this one has a 3-story building on it, MX13 because this one has a 12-story building on it. We gotta just say it's possible to add some height to these buildings.
Right.
I'll say, this is Dave. Finally said it. On August 8th, we're doing development standard goals, or I started with, isn't there a way that we can incorporate development standards to respond to historic buildings or special character needs? It's, well, I'm not asking the question. I know we can't.
Yeah, essentially.
Department of Historic Resources does it all the time. They're allowed to build height now next to smaller buildings. And it may be something as simple as a scale. It may be something as simple as a setback from a certain point. To me, those are things that could happen to compensate for, how we do infill.
You have a comment first?
And that would be discussed in standard goals.
Yeah, thanks for the comment.
This is Jennifer Mellon again. I just want to echo what Brian is saying. I mean, the city has old and historic districts, and that is the mechanism for the additional components. So if you are not in an old and historic district, then I would think that the corridor all needs to be the same. This exercise is not about, it's only about bringing some neighborhoods into conformity where they don't conform now, but I don't view this remapping as let's just see what's there and then we make it so. So I would just echo what Brian has to say.
So if you're talking about historic districts, are you only talking about city old and historic districts, or are
Yes.
you also including national?
No, you need to, if you want to make more old and historic districts, then you need to make a city old and historic district in order for it to come under that purview. Otherwise,
Technically, that seems reasonable.
If I can add just one final thought, we are of course landlocked as a city. And so if we're talking about adding density at scale, that the infill concept has to have the least amount of regulation and commitments to it. Whether it's historic, environmental, whatever the other layer of regulation and constraint that's being placed upon infill development, that's going to set us back in our ultimate goal of creating additional housing.
Okay, thank you. So 10 minutes left. I think we can get through the last couple points here, I'm hoping. We already talked about upzoning along major streets and enhanced transit corridors, mixed uses in residential districts. I'm not sure. I think I maybe just need to understand more. There are some people who felt like there were maybe more things that should be allowed. We are at present in the draft allowing small commercial uses of up to 1,500 square feet in RA and conditionally in RD. Did anybody feel that that was not enough? I just want to get some clarity on that.
Dave and Jennifer.
I think we had one of these discussions in our not high quality places, but one of these working groups. We discussed things where there are commercial uses that would be viable. And I would think any single neighborhood, I think any neighborhood could support some sort of nursery or garden space or public, or, some sort of place where there, you can have food stands or develop something. So I think there are uses that could be in all districts, and I think there are uses in residential, just residential districts that where the more intense population base is, we should be allowed to maybe do that 1,500 and not just the RD.
Okay.
Or not just the RA.
Okay. So not, something's by right, not conditionally.
By right, yes, in the residential district, let's say C. I'm not sure about B if that's intense enough. And maybe even some items in a residential, just a residential A.
Okay.
That would service that neighborhood.
Yeah, this is Jennifer. I would just add, and I think I've made this comment before, that 1,500 square feet just seems a little small for some of the districts, that it's sort of artificially keeping things vacant. And in our transportation working group, there was a heavy focus on services being walkable. So if we're talking about services being walkable, then I really think we need to think about these uses being incorporated into the neighborhood so that they can be walkable.
Thank you.
This is Wayne.
Sorry, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
Yes, this is Wayne Cradle. I definitely was concerned and still remain concerned about industrial light versus industrial mixed use. And so if I'm correct, industrial light does not include residential, if I'm not mistaken. But then industrial mixed use says that it incorporates some industrial light. So to me, it seems like the definitions contradict themselves. I'm always going to be concerned about uses to where certain spaces, whether that is maybe auto shops, things like that, or just any type of industry that's using a hazardous or chemical material being near a resident. So I'm wondering if we can consider, when it says some industrial light uses regarding the mixed use piece, if there can be a better definition, unless I don't see it, of exactly what's going to be allowed and not allowed.
Well, there's a draft use table that we put together that goes through a series of different types of industrial uses and identifies where they're allowed or not allowed, which you should be able to take a look at. The intention here is that, there is a concept of industrial mixed use, which is laid out in the plan that we're kind of responding to. And I think the idea is that it would be like extra light, like lighter than the regular light, but also allow residential there. So, we could certainly, think more about, specifically which uses go into there. So we can keep tinkering with that. But the idea is that it would be only things that would be, fully compatible with residential and retail.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. The increases and decreases in intensity, I think we've kind of had that conversation, unless there's anything else that people want to add. Just acknowledging there's still disagreement around the duplex question in RD districts. But I think for the moment, we're continuing to go with allowing duplexes there. We can revisit it later. Auto-oriented uses. Sorry, go ahead.
I think we spent far too much time talking about duplexes.
Yeah.
I would like to see it remain, and we need to give the chance to the public to weigh in when.
Yeah.
I don't think we're ever going to reach consensus amongst the advisory group, and it's taken up a lot of time. So at this point, I think it's appropriate to leave it in there and let the public respond during their public comment period.
That's exactly what I'm suggesting. Yeah, thank you. So to auto-oriented uses, and we're just about at the end here. Just would maybe put this to you. This is one thing we've talked about a little bit before. Some people question the utility of having the CG zone because it's not used that many and it's not applied in that many places on the map. And there's also some question about, whether some auto-oriented uses might be allowed outside the CG zone in some of the MX zones. We're still kind of struggling with this a little bit, so we'll need to think about it some more. But the current approach is really just applying CG along some of the outer corridors in the city away from nodes or BRT stops. We're also thinking maybe about allowing probably the most common auto-oriented use, which is a gas station, in some MX districts, the lower intensity ones, but maybe limiting the number of pumps. So if you had, a giant gas station that would only be allowed in CG, but something that would allow, let's say, up to 8 pumps would be allowed in MX 3 or 4 or something like that. I don't know if you have any thoughts about that. We could probably discuss this for a long time. But just briefly, any reactions to that?
All right, silence.
No, okay, very good. So the last point here was a bit of a catch-all, and I think we've already heard some of this from people. Not sure if there's anything else. I'm going to sort of combine this with the very last slide afterwards. Some people, had some, ultimately we're supposed to be taking direction from the plan all the time, so everything the zoning should be reflecting the plan. Obviously, there's room for, there's a lot of wiggle room in there and room for interpretation. So some people felt like we weren't properly reflecting the plan in some of the mapping. I think we've heard that in various ways in discussions today. I would just ask if there's anything else that hasn't been covered already along those lines, and I would maybe combine that with the last slide here and just say, is there anything else that was raised that we didn't touch on today that you really think is important for people who did comment or that we didn't accurately describe? Or for those who didn't comment, is there something that you really wanted to raise that we didn't have a chance to take a look at yet? So any of those things throwing out there for the last 5 minutes or so.
We'll go to Damien.
Well, one thing that we skipped that suspect would be controversial if we talked about it was about the fan district, and some felt that the base case should be RA-B rather than RA-A.
Yeah.
I don't think that, I'm the only one who made a comment in that whole area, and I'm not saying that the base case should be RA-B.
Okay.
My comment was, and I think that overall there's a fairly good smattering of higher than RA zoning in here that is higher than RA zoning. That's good. I just think there's a few additional corners, such as the one that I flagged, where a little bit beyond RA would be appropriate.
Okay, thank you.
Just further clarification of something I discussed earlier today, in the future land use designations. Basically, I feel like anything that's neighborhood mixed use or above, which is to say anything that's not just residential, should probably, in my opinion, should not have RDC, but instead start at the RA district. Just from like a gut feeling standpoint. I don't have an exact scientific reason as to why, but that just seems to make sense to me. And I think we did have those matrices showing at one point, I'm sure it's in one of my printouts at home, but where you mapped, where you charted future land use designation for version 300 at the top and you drew lines to proposed.
Yeah.
Revisit that maybe and just where applicable. The example I brought up specifically previously was the Chimborazo, other parts of Churchill that got an RD classification despite them having a neighborhood mixed use classification. So my personal opinion.
So I would say, because we're right almost at 6:30. Oh, Preston, go ahead. No, go ahead.
Sorry, just sort of a coming attraction call out, and I noticed a comment or two. It's unclear to me when we have a potential upzoning of a base zoning district today, but the property is currently subject to a community unit plan overlay district regulation. What is the impact of upzoning in the base zoning district? What does that do to the ability to provide future development if that property is currently subject to a CUP? And so just something when you get to the administrative chapter, to sort of keep in the back of your mind as to sort of how we manage that moving forward after amending the second.
Okay.
So I'll just close with reminding the advisory committee to go back and read the working group notes, and Renee left us with obviously a slide on additional discussion, and we didn't have a lot of time to get into that. So things that come up that you want to map, that you want to bring to Renee's attention, send that over to Mary Ann. And I see Mary Ann's already pulled up the slide. So in addition to our next advisory council meeting on July 9th at 4 p.m. here in this room, the city is also hosting 3 public open houses. June 25th from 4 to 7 at Southside Community Center, June 26th from 9 to 12 at City Hall in the first floor lobby, and June 26th from 4 to 7 at the Main Street Library to review the draft districts, uses, and map with the community. All open houses will have the same content. Attendees can stop by at any time during the 3-hour window. And also there will be a panel discussion on transportation and zoning June 24th from 6 to 7:30 at the main library. And there's information on the city's Code Refresh webpage with more information. So that gets us to the end of the agenda. Again, if something comes up that we didn't get to, please get it over to Mary Ann sooner rather than later so that she can send it over to Renee's team. And unless there's something that's going to keep you up at night that you have to ask, I'm going to go ahead and close.
Thank you.
Uh,